It's the 3rd of July, and most people are gearing up for fireworks and cookouts, but we're going to take a step back and reflect on what this country was built on and what it'll take to save it. This is a special Blaze News The Mandate right now. Welcome in, everyone. I'm Jill Savage, joined by our patriotic panel editor-in-chief, Matthew Peterson, and our DC politics editor, Chris Bedford. Gentlemen, Bedford's coming in hot here with the patriotic tie.
Yes,
he is ready for the 4th of July.
Prepared.
I can't wait. I don't think I'll be wearing a tie. I'll be out of uniform on the 4th itself. But today, we're getting ready. We're talking history, and I'm excited to join Professor Peterson's class again as he walks us through the rise and fall and potential rise again of the American Republic.
Yeah, we're going to look at what America was meant to be, where we lost the plot, and how we're going to bring it back. But I do want to start because President Trump tonight is in Iowa to kick off the countdown to the nation's 250th birthday. Now, what do we know about this? Well, if a Republican's in office, we actually get to celebrate the country. So we're excited that we don't have to spend the 250th birthday upcoming of America with, the charter of negative liberties, as Barack Obama would be calling it. I can only imagine what this country would be looking like right now if we had to deal with Kamala Harris. But no, we actually, MP, we get to start with Donald Trump and actually loving the country.
Yeah, I mean, this is really, really important stuff. It really is important that Trump and the entire administration has taken on this 205th anniversary to really, teach America or remind ourselves who we are and what this country is about. And, you can't really do civic education if you have leaders that hate the country. You have to have people, in power who are constantly reminding us of who we are and what this is about. And that's been in dispute, obviously, as you point out. And so coming together on that basis and having a series of, shows and, educational stuff and parties, I think it's going to be a lot of fun, too, with Trump, is going to be really revolutionary, because we haven't seen this before in a long time.
Bedford, are you ready to get down America 250? I mean, it's going to be something exciting for an entire year we're going to celebrate.
It's important because it's not even just, you don't even see the results of the miseducation or lack of education on these sorts of matters with left-wing hippies. You see it, you don't just see it with the Antifa folks, you actually see it on the American right as well and in the center. The number of people who don't quite understand why this republic is worth fighting for, why it matters, what its genesis was, all they see, they look around them right now, especially the Zoomers and the really young folks, and they see so many years of cultural rot and elites who simply hate them. And they say, well, this system's really terrible. I mean, what was so bad about being ruled by an overseas king in the first place? Of course, you look at England and what they have right now, and you realize that they're far ahead of us as far as dystopia goes, per usual. So this is just an essential thing. That's one of the reasons I loved that military parade so much. I know that the New York Times and other people were really predicting that this was going to be like Red Square, that you would see troops marching and missiles on display and this and that, but it was much more than that. It was a walk through history, which was cool for the veterans I was watching with as they saw the uniform that they wore at the time they wore it, marching by, now part of the history books for a lot of the new camo that's come out, the new technology. And it was cool for the kids to be watching that and seeing the old doughboys go by and the World War II soldiers go by, the American Revolutionary soldiers go by. I grew up with that stuff in Massachusetts, of all places, where you'd see the Minutemen parade. You'd hear the drums going by outside your window before mom was awake, but dad was awake and ready. And the dogs were, of course, freaking out because musket fire freaks them out. It was a cool thing to grow up in and to understand that this is where men stood. This is where men fought. This is not simply a museum. This is an actual place. Getting back to that and having a 250th anniversary party with the president, Donald Trump, is just going to be such a better experience than President Kamala Harris.
Yeah, if anything, the parade could have had a little bit more pomp and circumstance. If there's any complaints, it was people on the right saying like more, better.
More tanks.
But it's also important to point out that I don't want it to be like a complaint, right? That we're sitting here as like bitter people saying like, oh, no one knows about America. I mean, it's not. To a large degree, it's not anyone's fault because the entire system just stopped teaching it, stopped requiring it in so many places in the country. So obviously we all have a duty and responsibility to know more about our country, but really you're talking about at least 2 generations where you really have a systematic effort to deconstruct America, right, in the schools, in the stuff we learned. And over time, the sort of thing you're talking about seeing growing up has just lessened, right? And there's been less and less of that. And there's no one really, even reading the damn words of the founding.
And there's more to it than just the history lessons. There's also something that we've really gotten to see this administration, which is an understanding on the top levels of Washington of what the Democratic Party, modern Democratic Party, stands for. Maybe not your dad or grandfather's Democratic Party, but what's become what you're seeing in New York City, and a willingness to combat the left. I mean, a person who was a big proponent of teaching civics and American history, who actually I think was significantly better placed at a university than in the U.S. Senate, was Ben Sasse. Someone who people like to hate on, rightly so, I think, in a lot of ways, because he was so often just kind of that mindset, like you see with a lot of Tea Party folks and people like that, listen, if we just read the Federalist Papers, then everything would be fine. If we just think more about the founders and teach civics, and everything would be fine. You still actually do have to fight back. You actually have to stand up and wield the mechanisms of power in the United States government against people who are trying to undermine and destroy the American way of life, like you saw at USAID, which was just so phenomenal, and hopefully it continues. I know it's on the ropes right now. And simply teaching civics isn't enough. You need to have both, but it is an important step to just kind of understanding the role of a citizen, and not just understanding it, but acting on it, joining your local civic groups, everything else.
And even to teach civics, right, you have to fight. I mean, so even to make sure that happens, right? I mean, you gotta do an enormous political battle to get rid of all these people in the educational establishment and fight that war, which has really only just begun to happen with some of the things, especially DeSantis is doing in Florida. So, both are needed, and we should throw on top of that, right? The sort of cultural, right? I mean, I'm sure like the guys you saw going out there in the Minutemen, that wasn't always tied to a school, right? There's all kinds of cultural groups and institutions that need to come back to life here for us to really understand who we are.
All right, so let's get back to who we really are. Let's go all the way back to the founding of the country. Professor Peterson, we are going to start with you. This is your area of expertise. So what did the founders build? What did they want? Obviously, we are a republic, not a democracy. People get this wrong all the time. So take us back all the way to 1776.
Well, you guys are playing with fire here today when you ask someone who is a professor or was a professor to start professing. So, be careful what you ask for. And I'll try not to go on too long. I think that we should start with the fact that most countries, when they look at their birth or their starting place, it's shrouded in the mists of time. There's a lot of sort of mythology, written into the code, the source code of the country. You look all the way back. And it gets cloudy, and there's really myths, stories, and a lot of times they carry a lot of truth about the founding of a country. But the remarkable thing, and why I believe, as long as we don't burn the entire earth down, which we, I guess, could do, but if we don't do that, people will study the American founding for generations, if not millennia, henceforth. Why? Because we have the words, we have the documented history of how this country was founded. So the first thing to note is that there are thousands and thousands of pages of documents, letters from people, plays people wrote of a people on the Eastern Seaboard who, as soon as they get here, start having to govern themselves, and they start arguing about how to govern themselves as soon as they get here. So you think about this. I mean, you have the Puritans, right? Who, to tell the truth, no one quite liked in the merry old England. They come over here, but they're really interesting because they're shopkeepers. They're middle-class people. Imagine if you put a bunch of middle-class people now, in a boat, just random Americans, and said, go found a country. I'm not sure it would go as well, to be honest with you. So these people all come over, and they're constantly arguing and writing down their arguments and resolutions and small towns and charter documents. And then they start arguing about what form of government they could have. That leads to a 15-year period where John Adams says, if you want to know about the Revolutionary War, it's not the war itself. You got to read the 2 decades beforehand, everything in the public press, right? So they're constantly arguing about whether they should, how they should deal with the mother country. Then they decide to revolt, which is what we're going to talk about a bit today, and what we celebrate today. And then after that, they argue over the Articles of Confederation. That was a complete crap show. I mean, all the states were arguing. It took a long, drawn-out process. A lot of states didn't want to sign on. Then you got a bunch of guys who say, no, we need to do one better, right? We really need to create a real federal government. And they're arguing the Constitution. The Constitution is drafted, and then they have to go argue again, right, to get it passed. And that is the remarkable thing about it from the beginning. You can actually see this stuff. But the problem is we haven't read those words in a long time, and scholars don't sit there and think that, well, there's some smart people out there reading it. Most of these institutions, these books collect, dust on the shelves. It's like Chris said the other day about how the Senate works. I mean, those books aren't being checked out of the library, But the remarkable thing is that the founding is there, it's present, and you can actually look at it.
Bedford, jump in.
I like what you said there, Matt, about the Pilgrims and the Mayflower, because every Thanksgiving, even from well-read and intelligent people who are historians, I had this argument literally with an historian, was saying, well, actually, the first Thanksgiving was in South Carolina, and you see other states say, well, the first Thanksgiving, but we're not talking about the first time you had dinner and said thanks to God.
Right.
It's the importance of Plymouth was that this is where they came up with the original Mayflower Compact. It's a shot at self-governance. If they had landed in a more settled English part of the country, they wouldn't have had to do that. That's what they were kind of aiming for. They ended up in freezing cold and hot in the summer in Massachusetts, and that's where they had to come up with that compact, and that's the importance of Thanksgiving. It's not simply the first dinner where we said prayers.
Yeah, and then no offense to our friends from the South, but those colonies were different. I mean, because the people who were coming in the Northeast were trying to really found a new civilization, whereas you had a lot of commerce going on in the southern states. And so, this is a mixed bag, right? But roughly speaking, that was a very unique group of people who settled in the far-flung eastern seaboard, which was really on the edge of, a continent that no one really knew anything about and hadn't fully explored. So that is remarkable, and that's always been there. But the thing about it is, they were not the kind of people who got into fist fights and descended into anarchy, or who were hired help or slaves or indentured servants. These were people who were like normal middle class people who came over here and then had to do something that's incredibly difficult, right? And so what you notice right from the way is this Anglo-American notion of rule of law. They're constantly establishing order amongst themselves, and they have the discipline to do it, which is remarkable. And that kind of sets the tone, right, for even the revolution itself, which we should say is incredibly radical. I mean, this is a radical act. You have to, sometimes conservatives do gloss this over because they want to be conservative. But, I mean, George Washington and friends were going to be hanged. If they got this wrong, going up against one of the greatest powers in the world. And the interesting thing about that revolution is the reason they do that, they have to list out carefully, right? They have to list that out carefully in the Declaration of Independence, which is really kind of what we celebrate today. But I want to point out, and I'm sure Chris knows this as well, there's this great letter famous letter from John Adams to his wife about this day. And in the beginning of the letter, he kind of talks about how, we should have done this 6 months ago, but, maybe it's providential. It's good it's now. And he just says at the end, but the day is past. The 2nd of July, 1776 will be the most memorable epocha in the history of America. I'm apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illumination from one end of the continent to the other from this time forward, forevermore, prophesying the 4th of July, getting it exactly right, except for the fact that it's July 4th. But
I love that. And then you fast forward to the death of John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, and it happened to be on the 4th of July. So it all just kind of fits together. Even though we got the date wrong, Chris, it was still, we do a lot of those things still that John Adams was thinking we would do on that day.
And it makes sense. When I was scrambling on this weekend, I think it was Sunday morning, to try and figure out when exactly had the Senate done the motion to proceed, or had they just filed for cloture? What was going on? Was it Saturday night? Was it Sunday morning? Things get a little lost. And I loved how the founders occasionally would choose different dates. And my favorite aspect of them, the copy editors don't like this, is how they just chose different spellings that depended on how they felt. They weren't getting bossed around by the Associated Press or some dude named Webster.
There were no grammar Nazis then.
It was a stupid person who could only...
Yes.
None. It was a foolish man who couldn't figure out more than one way to spell a word.
Right. The way you spell show in that, there'll be shows as shoes, shoes with an E. One more letter from just a brief snippet from Adams, permit me, because one thing that we do forget is the fact that there was an actual war. And these guys had to fight. And you think about the founders, you think about them, with wigs on and writing the Declaration of Independence. But of course, they're also knee deep in the muck trying to keep a volunteer army that isn't professional, together, which is probably Washington's greatest achievement during that time. But there's a letter that during the war that Adams writes to his wife as well. And he says, this is compelling. He says, "Is it not intolerable that the opening spring, which I should enjoy with my wife and children upon my little farm, should pass away and laugh at me for laboring day after day and month after month in a conclave where neither taste, nor fancy, nor reason, nor passion, nor appetite can be gratified?" And he's super pissed off because everything is going wrong. There's a lot of things wrong in the world, and that's mostly what he complains about. And then he ends with, "Posterity, you will never know how much it costs the present generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make a good use of it. If you do not, I shall repent in heaven that I ever took half the pains to preserve it." And hearing that lament always strikes me. I usually read that letter every 4th of July.
Chris, the founders, they were just like us.
Yeah, and Abigail Adams was just like someone who a lot of people can sympathize with today. Her husband was often that gloomy. He was a dark man. He was a workaholic. If he thought he hated Philadelphia, wait till he got to Paris. Boy, did he hate France. And France didn't really like him very much either. Ben Franklin certainly didn't care much for him. But Abigail was always pulling him back and helping his writing, saying things like, "By the way, stop with all these fancy quotes from antiquity. Stop trying to prove how smart you are with all these long quotes. Just make the argument. You're talking to Americans. You're talking to farmers. You're talking to soldiers. You're talking to the people here, the middle class. That's who you're trying to reach. And if you're trying to persuade someone, don't pull someone who wrote that down 1,500 years ago. Pull it from your mind. You know these answers. And also be a little less gloomy, please." And that's important. Wives still serve that really important function to when we start to get black-pilled.
Hey guys, real quick before we jump back in, I have something special to tell you about, and it's only happening this week. At BlazeTV, we're officially calling this 4th of July No King's Day, because let's be honest, that's what the 4th of July really is. It's not just the fireworks and the cookouts. It's the day that we rejected the idea of a monarchy, the elites, and said we'd be ruled by we the people. That's the spirit behind Independence Day. And we didn't just break up with England. We built something better. We built a constitutional republic that's grounded in liberty, individual rights, and God-given freedoms. There's no kings, just self-governance, and we're under the rule of law. So right now, for the first time ever, you can get a 7-day free trial of BlazeTV. That means that you'll have full access to every show, every documentary, completely free for 1 week. It's your chance to celebrate the true freedom with us and support honest media and decide for yourself what's worth watching. So if you've ever thought about joining BlazeTV, this is your moment. There's no risk, no kings, just truth. So celebrate No King's Day the way the founders would have wanted, by choosing truth over tyranny. Start your 7-day free trial now at blazetv.com/BNT. That's blazetv.com/BNT. There's no promo code necessary. Just sign up for an account and start watching today and let freedom stream. Well, the founders gave us a blueprint, but sometime around 1913, things got a little off track, right? Let's get into how we went from limited government to an unlimited bureaucracy, and we love to blame Woodrow Wilson around here, MP.
That's true. That's one of the things that Glenn Beck did way back in the day, is point out to American conservatives that the progressive era is really the beginning of a lot of the stuff that we complain about now, and we see some bad fruit come out of. But you really have to start with the fact that the entire Western world, I'm going to get fancy here, but it's really simple stuff. The entire Western world, post-Civil War, between the Civil War and 1900, basically rejects the old idea of nature that the founders had. So, Thomas Jefferson was no card-carrying Christian. He famously wrote the miracles out of the Bible. But he read the Bible closely in order to take the miracles out, because he thought Christ was the greatest moral teacher, and he thought that reason showed you that, of course, there's a God who acts in human affairs over time, and of course there's good and evil, and reason and religion tell you the same thing. And roughly speaking, Aristotle's ethics, or what you can study in fancy school, is the same thing as what Christianity said. So he thought basically the morality of Christianity was correct. And he's an outlier. Like in Washington's farewell address, he goes out of his way to say, you need morality and you need religion. Indispensable supports, twin pillars, the entire government's based on that. And if you just have morality, yes, there should be some fancy minds out there like Jefferson, but that doesn't work. You need the Christian religion. So once between 1850 and 1900, the entire Western world, the intellectuals reject this idea of God and nature that everything was based on. Things start to go off the rails, and the first universities in America, I blame the professors for anything. Woodrow Wilson was a professor. He was the president of Princeton University. Don't elect the PhDs. And he gets in there, and he's kind of the culminating force of what was going on in those universities, which was a rejection of the principles of the American Republic. And that was over a century ago. And that battle has gone back and forth. Sometimes after World War II, we had a surge of patriotism and pride and sort of return to God in some ways. But the whole century, it really starts then. And so guys like Wilson and even FDR, there's a lot of great things they did, but these are people who, by and large, really didn't care or outright rejected the principles of the American founding.
Yeah, with Woodrow Wilson, we get the 16th Amendment, we get the 17th Amendment, the Federal Reserve, which I could do an entire hour on. We get all of the central banking that the founders never had intended for this country. But Chris, I want to ask you, right? We went through and we got to the phase where the Constitution was a living document and judicial activism. What's the biggest part of where you see this country getting off track? What is it for you? What stands out?
I think popularly elected senators was a serious, major issue for the American public. I know that us nerds like to point out, and I bet most of the people watching, that we are a republic, not a democracy, but we certainly look a lot more like a democracy than we used to when this country was founded. And having different competing interests was really important all around the country. That was an essential aspect where the senator from Massachusetts wasn't just pushing the left-wing cause in perfect hand-holding harmony with the senator from California, and the senator from Texas wasn't allied all the time with the senator from Florida on what they were pushing and what policy they had, because they came there and represented their state and its interests. Now, of course, that leads to different kinds of issues as well, and you do want someone who is answerable to more than just themselves. Of course, those people are answerable to the state legislature. So the chipping away at that over the years while at the same time decreasing civics education so that a number of Americans couldn't name their senators or name their congressmen makes them so that they are similarly unaccountable the way that they once were. But at least the state houses and the state senates paid more close attention to what they were doing and making sure that they were representative. And then you've got, of course, just the way that the parties have shaken out have been really good in some ways, but also really bad in some other ways. Republican Party used to be regional. Everything was regional for 100 years after the American Civil War. Republicans were in the North and Democrats were in the South. Now, that started to change. The Democrats went more towards exactly what Matt was talking about, the progressivism and the liberalism. There's no more conservative Democrats, really. And the very few that remain, like maybe you could point out someone like Eric Adams. He got pushed out of the party. Or the former mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, who was a pain in the butt left-wing lunatic under the Barack Obama years. But when you look at the party now, he stands on its right flank. Those guys are so rare, and they don't really seem to have a choice or an option. Republicans still have a lot of liberal Republicans. It's a major problem all throughout. But still, then, there's much more ideological aspects to the parties these days. It probably makes low information voting certainly a lot easier, but some of the interests and the competition are lost. And that competition being lost in the legislature is one of the reasons you have this imperial judiciary, this imperial executive in some ways, where they're not even jealous of their own power. So I'm curious, actually, to Matt, the Federalist Papers didn't predict this. They thought that it was part of man's nature to simply jealously guard his power and not focus on his social media profile and his fundraising numbers instead. How did that go so wrong?
Yeah, I mean, well, I would blame in part the formation of elites who don't have a sense of their own fame or honor tied to defending the institution. So if the best you can do is being popular on social media, right, and you want to get out of it quick and get the money in chicks, as Bob Dylan once said, if that's what you want, okay, then that's what you'll get. But what you point to is important, because when you change the structure of the thing, right, that's the progressives really did change some of the structure of it. And like you said, I mean, only one half, right, of the three branches, one half of them was popular elected officials, and that was the House. The Senate wasn't, the president isn't, and we've democratized that as well. So once you do that, then I think you make it harder. You make it harder for them to care about the institution as much. But I think you're right. There's a problem with elite may be a too fancy of a word, but with leadership in America not wanting or seeing their fame, their honor, what they're known for being tied to defending the institution. Really, they've been overcome, though, right? The institution almost doesn't have power, right, because of the oligarchic, because of the wealthy interests that want all the money, and because we created this administrative state apparatus. It's like an alternative. You get a lot of people, I guess, who defend their interests there, as we see now, as this administration tries to take over. And you see people, either going native or adopting the arguments of certain agencies once they get in there. So that still exists, but we have a real problem there. We have a real problem. We have to bring back some kind of self-interest tied to the Senate. But also, they'd have to see that, right? They'd have to see someone who gains notoriety and gets the statue for, boldly defending the power of an institution of Congress.
And you even see that with the oligarchy. It's so coastal now.
Yes.
The original or earlier manufacturers and the wealthy and the industrialists were spread throughout the country. There was very wealthy and powerful men in the Midwest, in the South, in the Northeast, and in the West. And now you see so many of them are just in New York or Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Texas, of course, has some as well. But the spread of business, the concentration of business in the capitals of finance, as opposed to in the heartland, has led to some of the undermining even of that power and the way it's spread out in our country.
Yeah, and I mean, really, the answer to your question really should be the rise of the administrative state, because I don't think people in Congress can even envision not being a creature of that thing at this point, or that's a scary thought for most of them.
So big.
And if they do see themselves as a leader, like a McConnell, they're sort of managers of the administrative state, right? Moving around funding and that sort of thing. Advanced managers who move funding, but still creatures. Yeah.
Well, we've seen it work. We know that it can work. So how do we actually go through and make America great again? Because we started the mandate because we know that the bureaucracy, they don't care who wins elections. They're just going through and expanding either way, right? So this is what we're trying to fight against. So Matthew, what the mandate at its core is trying to get back to just the founding of the country and making sure that we get back to these founding principles that actually did work at one point in time.
Yeah, so these are, I mean, this is all the marbles. These are the biggest questions you can ask as an American, and the problem is severe. And the problem is, at the level of the structure of government, or the fancy word people use, regime level. It's the actual like form of government, all the different parts and pieces, that is out of whack. And that means that we're not living under the constitutional republic that we had in the early American Republic, and this thing is metastasized in a way that really is outrageous. So, you have the actual Constitution, the words, and you have the Constitution of America as things actually work, and it's way out of whack. So what do you need to do that? Well, first off, you need to realize the scope of the problem. The scope of the problem is you have to bend back the actual structure of government into something other than it is right now. And if you do that, everyone's going to call you a tyrant, right? Because everyone who likes the current system will say, oh, this is unconstitutional to change, the constitutional practices back to something like the original Constitution. So how do you do that? What do you do? Well, you see the effort in this administration, Mike. I mean, DOGE was an effort to rein in, control over that entire administrative state apparatus. How long did that last? Right? There's still elements of it out there. This is enormously important, like how that flow of money happens. Can you actually self-govern and have elected political officials and political appointees take control of that thing, or does it just run itself? And that is the battle that, the mandate is focused on, because it's really the only game in town, and you see it going on out there in myriad ways, 1,000 different ways. But as Chris will tell you, there's so many efforts in this administration to counter it. That's what's heartening. And it's sort of finally someone on the right, administration on the right, even more than Trump last time, coming in, and there's a lot of people out there in the administration who recognize the scope of the problem and are actively fighting against it. And I mean, just came back from the Publius Fellowship. We had an alumni panel with very young alumni, and a number of them were in the administration, talking to the new fellows coming in, and a number of them were already in the administration. And these are people who are in their 20s. They understand everything we're talking about here. And if you're watching at home, you should know. I mean, there is this new generation of conservative leadership that is absolutely loaded for bear and understands the problem and is ready to fight. But nonetheless, as Chris Bedford has to document every day, it's a messy business there.
Yeah, and Claremont is going through and doing the Lord's work, getting that civics education back rooted in American exceptionalism. And I think I want to bring it back even just to what Donald Trump is doing with America 250, Chris. I think this is going to go through and create a new wave where it is cool to talk about all of these things that we're talking about here on this show. So how would you go about fixing the rot in this country?
Well, I love what they did as soon as they came in. One of the first warning signs about there's actually a lot of warning signs, but it's been obvious that the left uses things like, the Democrats use things like democracy just to describe them getting their way. And it's undemocratic if it doesn't go their way. And it seemed like an unstoppable machine. There was so much money behind it. There was so many administrative bureaucracies behind it. There were so many giant billion-dollar nonprofits behind it. I could never quite understand, where did all this money come from? Are these all just Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates' divorcees just giving out all these billions of dollars they feel guilty about? Who's funding this? And it turned out it was us. Having been in D.C. for over 20 years now, I did not realize just how deep the rot at USAID went, just how much the American taxpayer was putting into this left-wing governance. And that's one of the things that the mandate has been so phenomenal at actually seeking out and getting rid of and having those fights. And there's screams and there's yells, but even those Democrats who went forward and said, I cannot believe you're impacting foreign aid, I'm going to run on this for the next 2 years, the pollsters had to tell them, stop. The American people don't care. They don't care at all. In fact, they like this. This is a popular thing. You need to drop it. And they actually have. They've kind of walked away from those sorts of battles. But there is significantly more to fight. The bureaucracy is completely run full of folks who think that their job is to preserve democracy by being completely unanswerable, by making these rulings. Unfortunately, with the REINS Act, didn't actually make it in or didn't make it past the parliamentarian. It might have in a newer form. I have to catch up in a more succinct form. But the idea that the Senate ought to be overseeing and approving administrative regulations that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to the U.S. economy that are just made with the stroke of a pen in some office by someone you've never seen in the name of democracy. That's a real threat. And rooting that out and exposing it has been so essential because Republicans, the people who are likely to be selected as the next presidential nominee, Marco Rubio or J.D. Vance or someone, recognize this. They recognize that this is a serious issue. They also recognize something that so much of the libertarians of D.C., which are distinct from the libertarians of the country. You think of people in the countryside. You think about that guys in Nevada, your uncle who's got a bunch of guns and wants to be left alone. That's not what D.C. libertarians are like. They're so often paid corporate shills for major money interests, including big tech and some of the technology firms. They want unfettered global trade that undermines the American economy because they say, don't worry, things will get better after 30 years of them getting worse and worse and worse. They say, don't worry, it'll turn around if we just make our billionaire masters who buy tables at the Cato Gala richer and richer. And those people being exposed for what they were in the American governance, from DeSantis down versus Disney to Donald Trump versus some of these companies, has been phenomenal to say, listen, the American people rebelled against the concentration of power. If we'd been ruled by the East India Company as opposed to the British Crown, we still would have had an issue. We don't care that it's a semi-private company. The concentration of unanswerable power being wielded against the people is a major problem. And we saw it got really dangerous for a while after President Trump was kicked off of Twitter, after competitors to Twitter were kicked off of their hosting platforms and weren't even allowed to be on the internet, that the major corporations were swinging that hard against American liberties and freedoms and the American people and the American dream. The whole idea that if you don't like something, you can build it yourself. And that, for now, appears to be in full retreat, and it's a welcome sign.
Yeah, we're going to keep pushing for that here on the mandate. But Matthew, when I look at it, right, we can talk about nostalgia. We can say, oh, these things are great, but we know that we have to have solutions. And that's what we're trying to do here on the show every day, is just figure out how to go best about fulfilling Trump's mandate and making sure that we use this time, this very precious time that we have, wisely, because there's not a lot of it right now.
Yeah, you can really look at what we all were talking about in two phases, really simply as first, you got to roll back what Chris was just talking about. You got to get rid of the weaponized government, right? So first, it's like get rid of the negative. And by the way, part of that has to be absolutely 100% no backseas. Deportations at a massive scale. You let 20 million people in here, we can't do a damn thing. And none of what we're talking about makes any sense or matters unless we actually deport the tens of millions of random people that were dumped into this country. That is insanity. So that's number one, right? So there's a lot of these things that you need to right wrongs, and you need to make sure that the government stops attacking the idea of America and attacking Americans. And so that's a lot of the work you see now, and that's really important. But then beyond that, that's number one. You just got to beat back the bad guys and stop the insanity. But then after that, you do have to structurally reform or refound the federal government. That's the larger task, and I think ultimately more and more Americans are going to see that as essential moving forward. And let me be honest, that's probably going to take that's going to take a long time. We need two Vance terms. We need after this to go after it. But so everything in the administration right now revolves around time. The more time that people that's what they have. They have power, right? But the scarce commodity is time, and the clock is ticking. And all the smart people, the good people, they know that. And that's why every time they have to get in an argument with someone else on their own side or whatever else, we're wasting time. And I think our audience and the voters know that, and that's the challenge right now for the Trump administration.
And that's one of the left wing's best tactics. Mm-hmm. Whether you're trying to do anything, they tie you up in lawsuits. Federal injunctions, thank God, just took a major hit in the Supreme Court last week. But that was an important step. But these groups that were funded by the taxpayer were for billions of dollars would come out and they would sue the Republican administration to get them to stop them from doing something. They would tie them up for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, time's up. Now the Democrats come in, they put through a bunch of different new orders that are very, very, very difficult to actually undo. It's much easier to do things like that, to destroy things, than it is to actually create things. And they've taken advantage of that. And there's a weapon that the administration has that Republicans and conservatives didn't realize they had. And you see it in the lawsuits against Harvard, the lawsuits against other Ivy League colleges, when you see it when going after the endowment funds. For years, conservatives are going around trying to protect things and conserve things, which is something that you simply cannot do when you have to share power with someone who wants to destroy them and sometimes has power for 4, 8, 12 years and spends all that time wrecking things. But now they're looking around and saying, what exactly am I trying to conserve here? So many of the institutions in the commanding heights of the American system, from the corporations to the schools, are being using the benefits that we gave them as the American people, the carve-outs we gave them to allow them to flourish, to punish us and to undermine the American system and the American way of life and to go after the little guy. So now they're looking around and they're considering themselves almost revolutionary in the way they look at it. It reminds me of a early 1960s article M. Stanton Evans wrote, a great writer, young newspaper guy who wrote the Sharon Statement, asking, can conservatives be revolutionary? And you have to be, was his conclusion. It took a while for people to realize this and to catch up with it. But you have to look around at all these commanding heights and say, we're not in the defensive battle. We are on an offensive battle at this point. You need to go back and take those spots. You need to hold them accountable. You can't just let them sit in the sidelines for 4 years, and then when you leave power, they come back and do whatever they were doing before. You have to actually take it to them.
Well, gentlemen, tomorrow is the big day, the 4th of July. We all go home from the show tonight. We're going to get ready, all the traditions. It's a wonderful holiday. Now, I don't trust any of you heathens with your fireworks that you're just going to shoot off on your own. I hate that. That
you're even
bugs
wearing
me.
red.
That bugs me so much. But I do love the 4th of July. I want to get into some of our favorite traditions that we do. The Savages used to have a rib cookout every 4th of July. We would do this with 150 people in a backyard in Iowa, and we would have steel barrels that have been wielded together, and we cook ribs for 8 hours. Low and slow is the best way to do them, but just going through and getting together with family and then watching maybe some professional fireworks so no one dies or loses a finger, guys.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to risk our fingers on this one. This country's worth fighting for. This is a great American middle and working class tradition that the neighborhoods that a lot of us may live in around now, and all the neighbors are entirely for that. Some of them are snitches. They like to call the police officers, but then you just fire off more as soon as the cops leave. The cops came to our place in Cape Cod. I wasn't there a few years ago, but my parents' place, and they were flipping out that we were having this fantastic fireworks show that all the kids were watching and enjoying. They said, you're going to get fined. My brother said, well, how much is the fine? I said, $50. He said, well, everybody chip in $10 right now. Get off my lawn.
I can do this all day.
Just kept on going.
So one of my favorite videos of all time, you've seen this, right, was remember a few years ago when they banned fireworks in L.A. during COVID? And
yeah.
There's just that long helicopter shot of fireworks going off and, more than the 88 cities that used to fire them off. And that was just a glorious moment. And I think I may have told you guys off camera here, there's a place in Texas. I'm not going to go again, but that I eagerly went to. A friend of mine said, you got to go to this. It's kind of like a park. It's in a green area. There's nothing out there. You drive out there. And everyone just drives in. And ladies and gentlemen, I mean, I'm not joking. It's like there's this packed. And it's nothing but people lighting off dangerous fireworks. It is the most unsafe ocean nightmare that you've ever seen in your life. And even that night, we had, hit, thank God no one was hurt by a firework in our own family. And I'm glad we did it, but I'm not going back. But it was the most Texas American thing I've ever seen in my life, and it was absolutely insane. All
right, MP, give us your 4th of July traditions. What do the Petersons do?
Well, we like to see live fireworks. This year, we're all in different parts of the country traveling, so I have decided to go see the Publius Fellows again, and from Claremont, and we will be on a yacht in the Newport Beach Harbor watching the fireworks from there, which will be very enjoyable. Very enjoyable. Safe distance on the water, sailboat nationalism. It checks all my boxes.
How's baby Josephine going to spend her first 4th of July, Chris?
You can't do the safe distance, Matt, because then you got to feel them in your chest. Otherwise, it's just special effects.
No.
I got a TV for looking at colors. My screensaver puts up colors. I need to feel the explosion in my bones.
Yes, there you go.
Get right up there.
Yeah.
You know, traditionally, I would always cook lobster, cook a big seafood and steamers. I grew up in New England. It's something I love to do. But this year, I'm flying the family down to Georgia. So I'm in charge of grilling for the in-laws and working with the cousins. We're going to go down to the butcher shop at the end of the street. And baby Josephine, hopefully, will be asleep before the first fireworks really start to explode. Because otherwise, that's a late night. And, that's the thing about 4th of July. Not only have parades, by the way, gotten so lame in so many towns.
They really
real
have.
Estate agents and politicians with dumb signs.
And bad candy. Bad candy now.
Yeah,
come on.
Cruddy candy, like a 2000 convertible. It's not even an antique car yet. These things are kind of lame. You should have to have a float. You should have to have drums. You should have to have music. In order to even enter a parade, you should have to do that. So we're going to try and seek one of those out. But then when you have your kid in the sun all day, my 9-year-old, and he knows that this is a special occasion to mom, so dad can't just ground him if he decides to act out on all that candy. And then you bring him to some crowded park until 10:30 at night. That's when the fireworks actually start going up. You got a meltdown on your hands.
Oh, yeah.
So that's another reason you got to DIY at home. Grandpa's not going to love this.
No, this is a really important point. And by the way, if you look up the effects of candy on kids, it's the same as cocaine for adults. It's like, if you ever just look up the effects of sugar on kids, it's like a heightened sense of self, running around followed by a crash. Like they're basically like running around on coke. Before we go, has anyone ever done the actual get all the big fireworks? Have you had occasion to do that? Because we lived out in the country once, and I went out and I bought a bunch of give me your best fireworks from one of those stands where things are marginally legal. And I was shocked in a pleasant way at how big they were because I'd never done it before.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
There's a reason why I don't trust any of you. I've done this before. I grew up in Iowa. We would go out into the country when you couldn't buy fireworks in Iowa. You had to drive down to Missouri and get them. But don't worry, all of my cousins, all of my uncles, everyone, they would just light them off in my grandma's yard. And some of them decided to take a turn and come at us. So I have a reason, at least, that I'm like,
You've been wounded.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a trigger.
PTSD here. I don't know.
So what are you doing?
I'm actually going to be here with Peter Giedel and his wife Amy, and I'm going to go through, and I usually do game day boards for college football weekend, where it's going to be all red, white, and blue. I'm going to go all patriotic. Okay. And it's going to be hopefully festive and fun, and it's always food related. Bedford, it has to be.
Oh, okay, I like that. At first, I thought you were talking about board games. We're gonna play board games.
No, like a charcuterie board, but except it's not just going to be meats and cheeses.
Yeah, little America thing.
Okay, that sounds good. I've caught your game day boards. They look phenomenal.
Yeah. There you go. Thanks. Thank you for noticing, Bedford. Hey, that's going to wrap it up here for our very special 3rd of July. We are going to celebrate, hopefully, as well as we possibly can out there for the 4th of July, because it's finally okay to love America again, guys. We need to take advantage of the opportunity while it's still in front of us.
Absolutely. I mean, again, Trump initiating this 250th is so important. This is such good stuff. Enjoy.
Bedford, have fun out there in Georgia.
Oh, it's going to be beautiful. I can't wait.
All right. Have a great
4th of July,
everybody. We'll see you back here on Monday.